Have you ever stood so close to someone that you could feel their heartbeat, yet a wall of fear, pride, or pain kept you apart? This is the story of a millionaire who vowed never to touch her until the night her tears shattered every boundary he built. Fear of vulnerability can be stronger than desire, and in many ways, it is one of the most powerful forces guiding human behavior. We often assume that people avoid closeness because they lack interest, affection, or emotional depth. But the truth is far more complex. Sometimes, a person wants connection more than anything, yet their fear of being emotionally exposed outweighs their hunger for intimacy. This fear doesn't discriminate. It affects the wealthy, the powerful, the seemingly confident, and even those who appear emotionally indifferent. In the story of the millionaire who refused to touch her, his resistance was not rooted in arrogance or lack of attraction. In fact, it was the opposite. His desire for her was undeniable in the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, in the way he lingered near her without stepping too close, in the way he felt alive in her presence yet refused to reach for her. His distance was not rejection, it was a shield. For him, vulnerability was a threat. Desire was something he could manage, suppress or push aside. But vulnerability, that meant opening a door he had kept locked for years, maybe even decades. It meant risking the possibility that she would see the parts of him he preferred to keep hidden. His past wounds, his insecurities, his unspoken fears. And for a man who built his life on control, precision, and emotional self-containment, losing that control was terrifying. Many people misunderstand this kind of fear. They assume that if someone truly cares, they would simply act on their feelings. But the human heart does not operate on such straightforward logic. When someone has been hurt deeply, whether by betrayal, abandonment, disappointment, or failure, the mind learns to link vulnerability with danger. The body responds with tension, resistance, avoidance. Intimacy becomes a battlefield rather than a comfort zone. That is why desire alone is not enough. To break these emotional barriers, desire pulls a person forward, but fear pulls them back with equal or greater force, and fear often wins. Not because it is stronger, but because it is familiar. Fear is predictable. It is safe. It is something a person can control. Vulnerability, however, is unpredictable, and that uncertainty is what terrifies people who have spent their entire lives building emotional armor. The millionaire, despite his wealth and power, was essentially a man surrounded by invisible walls. Every loss he endured reinforced those walls. Every betrayal added another brick. Every moment of weakness he regretted made him more determined to appear untouchable. Wealth became his shield, success became his disguise, and distance became his method of survival. So when she walked into his life gentle yet strong, warm yet grounded, capable of seeing through the persona he displayed, she threatened everything he had built to protect himself. He desired her, yes, but he feared what she represented even more. A chance to feel again, to hope again, to risk again. People like him often believe that vulnerability is synonymous with weakness. They view emotional openness as something that can be exploited. They fear repeating the pain that once broke them, and so they choose safety over connection, even if that safety leaves them lonely, misunderstood, or emotionally detached. This internal battle is not always visible, but it is real. It plays out in the hesitation before a confession, in the quiet retreat from affection, in the way a person becomes distant at the very moment they feel closest to someone. This is why his refusal to touch her was not apathy, it was fear disguised as indifference. But fear, when unaddressed, becomes a prison. It prevents a person from experiencing the very thing they long for. It convinces them that distance is the only way to prevent hurt, even though distance itself becomes a source of pain. People who fear vulnerability often live with a quiet longing that they suppress, hiding it behind routines, responsibilities, or a carefully constructed image of strength. What made the millionaire's struggle so powerful was not the fact that he resisted her touch, but the reason behind it. It revealed how deeply he felt, how intensely he cared, and how terrified he was of losing control of those emotions. His silence was loud. His distance was not emptiness, it was overflowing with unspoken emotion. This fear of vulnerability is one of the most universal human experiences. It affects relationships, friendships, families, and even opportunities for growth. It stops people from saying, "I need you," "I miss you," "I care," or "I'm hurt." It keeps people trapped behind masks of perfection, strength, or independence while they yearn for connection beneath the surface. In his case, the fear was stronger than the desire until the night her tears changed everything. Because when someone you care about is hurting, fear becomes irrelevant. The instinct to protect overrides the instinct to hide. In that moment, vulnerability becomes an act of love rather than a risk. Fear may be powerful, but compassion is transformative. And once he felt her pain, his fear no longer mattered. People often believe that the emotional walls they build are acts of strength, shields that protect them from pain, heartbreak, disappointment, and vulnerability. And perhaps in the beginning, those walls do exactly that. They provide safety, they give structure, they offer control. When life becomes unpredictable, overwhelming, or cruel, building emotional walls feels like the only logical response. They create distance from fear. They help a person survive, but somewhere along the way, something changes. The very walls that once served as protective barriers slowly transform into confinements. Without realizing it, people begin living inside the walls instead of behind them. And what was meant to protect the heart ends up imprisoning it. This was the millionaire's reality long before she came into his life. He had built walls so thick, so carefully constructed, and so deeply internalized that he no longer knew how to live without them. They had become part of his identity, the tough exterior, the emotional restraint, the stoic distance that made him seem unreachable. He believed those walls kept him safe from disappointment and heartbreak. He believed they kept him in control, but the truth was harsher. His walls were not keeping danger out. They were keeping love, connection, and healing from ever reaching him. At first glance, walls seem like smart solutions. When someone's trust has been broken, or when they've been abandoned or underestimated, building emotional boundaries becomes a survival strategy. But the human heart is not designed to remain locked away. We are wired for connection, for warmth, for presence. And when we deny those basic emotional needs, the walls that once protected us end up suffocating us. The millionaire lived every day with the illusion of freedom. He believed he was in control of his emotions, relationships, and choices. He worked alone. He thought alone. He guarded himself from anyone who got too close. Yet the reality was that he was trapped inside the fortress he had built, unable to step out even when he wanted to. People often think they can choose when to let their guard down, that if the right person comes along, the walls will simply fall. But walls don't crumble on their own. They become habits, patterns, and fears woven so deeply into a person that even when love arrives, they don't know how to open the gate. That is why he refused to touch her. Despite wanting her, despite feeling drawn to her, despite sensing a connection he had never known before, he couldn't allow himself to step beyond the boundaries he built. Touching her would mean opening a door, letting her in, risking change, facing old wounds he'd buried beneath years of emotional discipline. His walls created distance he could no longer escape. The tragic irony is that the stronger the walls, the lonelier the person behind them becomes. And yet, instead of breaking those walls, many people reinforce them. They convince themselves they are safer this way, but safety without connection becomes isolation. Control without softness becomes emptiness. Silence without expression becomes emotional starvation. The millionaire's wealth, status, and power only strengthened the illusion that he needed no one. Yet, money cannot hold you at night. Achievements cannot wipe your tears. The empire he built around himself only made his emotional walls appear more justified. Until one night, those walls were tested. When she cried, when she broke down in front of him, something inside him shifted. Not because he suddenly decided to let go of his walls, but because for the first time, he realized how deeply those walls were costing him, how much they were keeping him from experiencing the very connection he had always craved. Her pain did not climb over his walls. It seeped through them. It reached the part of him he had buried, the human part, the tender part, the part capable of compassion and closeness. And in that moment, his walls no longer felt protective. They felt cold, empty, restrictive, suffocating. People often discover too late that their protective barriers have kept out not just Pain but also love, not just disappointment but also joy, not just vulnerability but also healing. A person cannot selectively block emotions. When you shut out the possibility of hurt, you also shut out the possibility of being deeply understood. The millionaire's resistance was not strength, it was a symptom of emotional imprisonment, and her presence forced him to confront the reality that he had been living inside his own carefully crafted cage. Walls do not ask permission before they turn into prisons. They do not warn you before they limit your ability to connect. They do not reveal themselves as problems until someone arrives who makes you realize what you are missing. The millionaire built his walls to stay safe from the world, but in the end, those same walls prevented the world and the woman he cared for from reaching him at all. Compassion breaks barriers that pride cannot. This truth is at the heart of every deeply human relationship, and it is one of the most powerful forces in the story of the millionaire and the woman he tried so hard to keep at a distance. Pride builds walls. Compassion slips through them. Pride strengthens defenses. Compassion softens them. Pride demands control. Compassion creates connection. For the millionaire, pride had become his armor. It was the polished surface he showed to the world, the unshakable image he crafted through disciplined silence, carefully measured interactions, and a refusal to show softness. Pride told him that he didn't need emotional closeness. Pride convinced him that vulnerability was dangerous. Pride whispered that distance made him strong, untouchable, superior. But compassion, her compassion, was something he never prepared for. In the beginning, he assumed she would be like everyone else who approached him, curious about his wealth, impressed by his presence, intimidated by his silence. He expected her to admire him, to feel small beside him, or to seek something from him. Because pride told him that the only way to stay in control was to remain distant and unreachable. She didn't want anything from him. She didn't admire him for his money. She didn't shrink from his coldness. She didn't flinch when he avoided her touch or kept his guard up. Instead, she treated him like a person, not a title, not a bank account, not an image. That was the first crack in his armor. Compassion does not demand attention. It invites trust. And her presence, gentle yet firm, slowly made space where his pride had once ruled. Every time she spoke with understanding instead of judgment, every time she looked at him with sincerity instead of expectation, every time she stayed calm when he pushed her away, something inside him shifted. Pride could not withstand her warmth. His walls were not built for that. Pride functions like ice. It is cold, hard, and immovable until warmth touches it. Then it melts quietly, almost imperceptibly, but inevitably. Her compassion was that warmth. He had spent years, maybe decades, believing that people were selfish, that affection came with conditions, and that letting someone close was equivalent to handing them a weapon. That belief made him careful, calculating, emotionally withdrawn. And yet here she was, standing beside him with no agenda, no demands, and no fear of his cold exterior. She didn't try to change him. She didn't force him to open up. She didn't criticize his silence or his distance. She simply cared freely, naturally, and without hesitation. Compassion has a way of making even the strongest defenses feel unnecessary. It reaches the parts of a person that pride cannot touch. Because compassion does not fight the walls, it softens the heart behind them. It does not demand entry, it waits calmly until the person inside chooses to open the door. For a man who had been hardened by life and isolation, this was unsettling. He didn't know how to respond to kindness without suspicion. He didn't know how to receive care without fearing the consequences. Pride had taught him to expect betrayal, disappointment, and ulterior motives. But compassion did not play by those rules. It did not challenge him, it changed him, and yet he still held back. He still refused to touch her, still maintained a respectful but undeniable distance. Not because he didn't feel anything, but because he felt too much. Pride told him to remain composed, to maintain boundaries, to avoid letting emotion guide him. But compassion has a unique power. It awakens a person to their own humanity. This awakening came on the night she cried. Her tears were not manipulative or dramatic. They were real, quiet, raw. They carried hurt, exhaustion, and a kind of vulnerability he recognized because he had felt it too but had never allowed himself to show it. In that moment, pride lost all its power. Pride would have kept him still, compassion moved him, pride would have told him to remain distant, compassion pulled him toward her, pride would have insisted on silence, compassion made him whisper her name. It wasn't desire that made him reach for her, it was empathy. The simple, deeply human realization that someone he cared about was hurting. His instinct to comfort her was stronger than his instinct to protect himself. This is the magic of compassion. It bypasses logic, ego, fear, and pride. It speaks directly to the soul. Her tears did not weaken him, they awakened him. He saw her pain and understood it. He saw himself in her vulnerability, and for the first time he realized that connection was not a threat, it was a lifeline. Something inside him broke open, not because he was defeated, but because he finally allowed himself to feel. In that moment, compassion accomplished what pride never could. It reached him. Real strength is the courage to feel. This truth is often overlooked in a world that celebrates emotional independence, stoicism, and self-control. People are taught from a young age that strength means not crying, not breaking, not showing pain, especially men, and especially men like the millionaire in our story, who grew up believing that emotions were liabilities, not expressions of humanity. He mastered the art of appearing strong. His face rarely revealed what he felt. His voice stayed calm even in chaos. His posture radiated control, power, and confidence. People admired him for it. They called him disciplined, stable, intimidating, admirable, but no one saw the price he paid for wearing that mask every day. The world applauded his emotional silence without realizing that silence was built on years of unspoken hurt. True strength is not the ability to hide emotions. True strength is the willingness to experience them, but for him, emotions were dangerous. Feelings were unpredictable. Opening up meant stepping into a space where he could be judged, rejected, or misunderstood. So he learned to numb himself. He focused on business meetings instead of relationships. He chased achievements instead of affection. He surrounded himself with luxury, but avoided emotional intimacy. In doing so, he convinced himself that this was strength, the kind of strength that kept him safe from heartbreak. But the truth was that he wasn't strong. He was guarded. He was careful. He was afraid. People often confuse emotional avoidance with strength because avoiding emotions is incredibly common. It looks clean, controlled, and mature. But emotional avoidance is not strength. It is fear dressed in armor. Strength, real strength, is the courage to feel deeply even when it hurts. And the woman in his life embodied that strength. She felt openly. She expressed herself. She let herself be moved by what she cared about. When something hurt her, she didn't pretend it didn't matter. When something made her happy, she didn't hide her smile. She lived from the heart, not from fear. To him, that made her unpredictable but also mesmerizing. He couldn't understand how she could be so open, so sincere, so emotionally honest. But deep down, he admired it. She was brave in ways he could never allow himself to be. What he didn't realize was that the courage to feel is not something people are born with. It is learned through experience, through heartbreak, through resilience. It is forged in moments of vulnerability, very moments he spent his entire life avoiding. For years, he believed that emotions made people weak. Yet every time she showed empathy, kindness, or honesty, he felt something shift inside him. He saw a strength in her that outmatched all the power he held. But he was not ready to acknowledge his own emotions, not yet. That's why he refused to touch her. If he let himself hold her, he would have to confront the feelings he buried. And confronting those feelings meant facing the truth, that despite his wealth, his accomplishments, his carefully built persona, he was lonely. He was longing. He was human. Strength requires a kind of bravery he wasn't ready for, the bravery to feel deeply, to admit desire, to confront fear, to allow connection instead of resisting it. He tried to hold on to the version of strength he thought he understood, the version where he remained in complete control, the version where no one could hurt him because no one truly knew him. But emotional walls cannot protect someone forever. The moment she cried in front of him, everything changed. Her pain stirred something in him that he could no longer suppress. He felt a surge of empathy, protectiveness, and affection, emotion stronger than the fear he spent years nurturing. In that moment, he discovered something life-altering. To feel is not to be weak. To feel is to be alive. Her tears didn't scare him. They woke him. They reminded him that strength doesn't come from holding emotions back, it comes from allowing them in, acknowledging them, and responding to them. For the first time in a long time, he let himself feel something without suppressing it. He let himself care openly. His instinct wasn't to retreat, it was to comfort her. Not because he lost control, but because he found it. Control does not come from emotional distance. Control comes from self-awareness, from understanding what you feel and why you feel it. By allowing himself to respond to her pain, he opened a door he had kept locked for years. And through that door, he discovered a deeper form of strength, one that didn't rely on silence or stoicism, but on authenticity. Real strength is not found in untouched emotions. It is found in experienced emotions. It is not found in avoiding heartbreak. It is found in having the courage to love anyway, and it is not found in perfection. It is found in the willingness to be human. Connection transforms people. This is one of the most powerful truths in human experience and one of the most underestimated. We often think change comes from discipline, decisions, or dramatic life events. But some of the deepest change comes from something much quieter, gentler, and more human: connection. When the millionaire met her, he didn't believe in connection. He believed in contracts, logic, responsibilities, and measurable outcomes. He trusted numbers, not emotions. He invested in stocks, not people. To him, connection was unpredictable, messy, and risky, and a man who built an empire on strategy could not afford anything he couldn't control. But connection doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't follow rules, timelines, or logic. It enters quietly, sometimes without being noticed, and begins reshaping a person from the inside out. That's what happened to him. At first, it was subtle. He found himself listening to her more than he intended to. He remembered small things she said, things he would normally dismiss or forget. Her laugh stayed with him longer than he expected. The way she showed kindness even to strangers unsettled him, not because it was strange, but because it made him feel something he had long buried. Connection always begins with awareness, the moment you realize someone touches your thoughts without trying. For a man who lived in emotional solitude, this awareness was both intriguing and terrifying. He didn't understand why he cared about her opinions, why her presence softened the edges of his day, or why her absence felt heavier than he cared to admit. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was temporary, insignificant, easily replaced. But connection doesn't disappear when ignored. It deepens, it rearranges things, it exposes the gaps inside you. It reveals the loneliness you've become too good at hiding. He didn't want to be transformed, not consciously. Transformation meant change, and change meant vulnerability, two things he had spent his entire adulthood avoiding. But connection doesn't demand that you be ready. It simply grows. Every conversation with her added a new layer to his life, a layer of softness where there was once only steel. She didn't try to fix him or save him or understand all his shadows. She simply existed beside him in a way that made him feel seen without being judged, and that alone was transformative. Connection is powerful because it speaks to the deepest needs of the human heart, the need to be known, to be understood, to be accepted, to be valued. These needs don't disappear just because someone ignores them. They simply wait quietly for the moment someone touches them again. As she slowly became part of his world, something shifted inside him. He found himself thinking differently, feeling differently. He questioned the walls he built, the silence he lived in, the emotional distance he once thought was necessary. For the first time in a long time, he considered the possibility that life could be more than work, control, and isolation. But transformation is uncomfortable. It challenges old beliefs. It confronts old fears. It requires letting go of old versions of yourself. And that terrified him. He fought the transformation, convinced that staying emotionally detached made him strong. Yet his actions betrayed him. He found excuses to see her. He listened more attentively. He became protective without meaning to. His heart softened even when his mind resisted. Connection was reshaping him quietly, steadily, deeply. The final push came the night she cried. It was the moment when everything he suppressed surged to the surface. Her tears awakened something inside him he didn't know still existed: empathy, tenderness, protectiveness, and a yearning to comfort her. These emotions were not new, they had always been there, hidden under layers of self-protection. Connection didn't give him new emotions. It reminded him of the ones he had forgotten, and that is the essence of transformation. Connection doesn't turn you into someone else. It brings you back to who you truly are. The version of yourself that existed before the world hardened you, before pain taught you to hide, before fear taught you to shut down. Her presence revived the humanity he buried beneath ambition. It awakened the emotional depth he denied himself. It showed him that closeness was not a weakness, but a lifeline, and it made him understand that people don't change because they are forced to, they change because someone gives them a reason to. Connection is not grand or dramatic. It is gentle. It is steady. It is transformative in ways that discipline alone cannot achieve. It softens pride. It loosens fear. It heals wounds you never admitted you had. It transforms not by demanding change but by inspiring it. And through her, he discovered that connection could reach parts of him he thought were permanently closed. Love is a choice, one that starts with vulnerability. People often talk about love as something mysterious, automatic, uncontrollable, as if it simply happens, suddenly and without warning. But the truth is far more powerful. Real love does not come from destiny alone. Real love is a decision, a conscious opening, a repeated choice to show up, to feel, to stay, to trust, and to reveal the parts of yourself you once hid. The millionaire never understood this. For most of his life, love was something he believed belonged to others: the emotional, the expressive, the open-hearted. People who wore their feelings visibly, people who allowed themselves to hope. He thought love was too risky, too unpredictable, and above all, too dangerous. When he first felt drawn to her, he tried to deny it. He refused to touch her because touching her would mean acknowledging his feelings. And acknowledging his feelings would mean stepping into a territory he had avoided all his life: vulnerability. But vulnerability is where love begins. Not in grand gestures, not in perfect moments, not in attraction alone, but in the decision to let someone see you, the real you, the flawed you, the scared you, the hopeful you. Most people imagine vulnerability as weakness, but it is actually the foundation of intimacy. Without it, love becomes an illusion, a surface-level attachment with no depth, no truth, no soul. And this is why he kept himself distant, emotionally guarded, hidden behind a mask of confidence. He wasn't resisting her, he was resisting the exposure that loving her required. Love is not just a feeling, love is a willingness to be seen. When she entered his life, she brought with her a kind of acceptance he had never known before. She didn't pressure him to open up. She didn't demand emotional confessions. She simply showed up, consistently, honestly, tenderly, and her presence planted a seed inside him, the idea that maybe love wasn't the enemy he feared. Yet fear still held him hostage: fear of heartbreak, fear of losing control, fear of being vulnerable in a world that once punished him for it. People often choose emotional isolation because it feels safer. Vulnerability exposes a person to rejection, disappointment, misunderstanding, and pain. It requires trust, something he had never given easily. To love someone meant taking a risk he didn't believe he had the strength to take. But the truth is, love requires courage, not because it guarantees pain, but because it offers possibility. Possibility of connection, possibility of healing, possibility of being known and accepted in a way no achievement ever could offer. When she cried that night, everything he had been avoiding confronted him at once. Her vulnerability became a mirror, reflecting back the vulnerability he had suppressed. He realized that he couldn't comfort her without revealing himself, and he couldn't hold her without opening the very door he kept shut for years. For the first time, he understood that loving her wasn't something that simply happened. It was a choice, one he had been too afraid to make. But when faced with her tears, he discovered something profound. Caring for her felt more important than protecting himself. Her pain mattered more than his fear. Her trembling voice reached the part of him that wanted to be brave not for himself, but for her, and that is what love often does. It invites us to choose something greater than our fear. He reached for her not out of impulse, not out of desire alone, but out of a conscious decision to step into vulnerability. Holding her meant letting her feel his warmth. It meant allowing himself to care openly. It meant acknowledging that he needed her, even if he could not yet say it out loud. Love begins in moments like this, not perfect, not polished, but real. Because love is not the absence of fear. Love is the choice to move forward despite fear. It is the willingness to say, I will let you matter to me. I will let you see me. I will take the risk of caring, because caring is worth it. He began to understand that vulnerability was not the loss of control he once imagined. It was a doorway to connection, understanding, healing, and emotional truth, and stepping through that doorway didn't make him weaker. It made him human. Love requires that we choose to be open even when our instincts tell us to close. It requires that we reveal instead of retreat. It requires trust, honesty, and presence, things he had avoided his entire life. But as he held her that night, he understood something unmistakable. Love does not demand perfection, it demands vulnerability. All the walls he built, all the pride he held onto, all the fears that kept him distant, none of them mattered in that moment. What mattered was the choice he made, the choice to feel, to reach out, to comfort, to care. Love is a risk, yes, but it is also a gift that begins the moment we choose to be vulnerable enough to receive it. And so, when we look at this story, not just as a tale of a millionaire and a woman who finally broke through his walls, but as a mirror held up to our own lives, we begin to understand something deeper. We all carry silences. We all carry moments we never speak of, wounds we hide behind ambition, pride, or the simple fear of being seen too clearly. But this story reminds us of hard truth. No matter how strong we pretend to be, no matter how high we build our walls, love, real, human, fragile love, has a way of reaching us where nothing else can. The millionaire did not fall because he was weak. He didn't reach for her because he lost control. He reached for her because the first time, someone didn't want his money, his status, or his perfection. She wanted his truth, and when her tears fell that night, they did what all genuine emotion does. They cut through the noise. They cut through the act. They cut through the mask. Her vulnerability awakened his humanity. This is the heart of the message. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in. And sometimes the most life-changing moment arrives not in strength, but in softness. So as we walk away from this story today, let it stay with us as a reminder that connection is not built on wealth, power, or perfection. It is built on honesty, compassion, and the courage to be seen. Because in the end, the moment he finally touched her wasn't about desire. It was about release. It was about healing. It was about two guarded souls finally finding the one thing they never expected: home.